bit first so I can just remember what I was saying. Thank you. So as Hannah says, I was really lucky. I went to City Lit and did the diploma, which is like 2 year, 2 days a week, and it changes your life anyway. It takes your mind apart and reassembles it in strange ways. And then we came here as a student stand, and I managed to, amazingly, win a student award, which is great at my age. It seemed a bit bizarre, to be honest. But it has been fantastic, and actually especially because of the pandemic, I guess it still gave me a direction, because I knew one thing in the diary is I'm coming to the next one of these. So you have to keep making, you have to keep developing. And pot plays, of course, were fantastic, because then I had materials to work with, I had lots of things to test with. And again, it's that feeling that you've got a bit of a backup. And of course, I want to say a thank you to Valentine's, because, we're here. I mean, it's just, we're here. You know, they've kept the faith and everything, and they have taken this on, and it's just fantastic that we're all here. And thanks for breaking my arm that time, Hannah, when you said, would you like to do a talk? It's almost better. Well, anyway, so you have to forgive my sound of nerves, which normally I wouldn't have, because I used to be a secondary school teacher. So I thought, well, if you're all bad, it'll be just like year 9, that's fine. Hannah's taking detention. But it's the cameras that have made me go, woo! So forgive me for that. But also thank you to you guys for turning up and having a look at this. Thank you. I'm going to do I do the next slide, please? And here we are in COVID times. Yes. So I used to make animals and do general pottery. So I was at Art and Clay many times as like a group stand with a KPA and doing run-of-the-mill, I wouldn't say run-of-the-mill, but animals, but not as good as lots of, people who specialise, but having a nice time. So then I went off and I did this course, and as I say, I tried to use those skills to do something else, to try and have a message. Because I came years and years ago from, my very first degree was in engineering design, I guess I've looked at like the feminine side from another point of view. And so it's something that matters to me, in that if you're looking from an outside in, you go, what on earth? It's not hard being an engineer if you're a girl, because people give you kudos. So it's not a problem. It's hard being a girl. That's the only thing. I've got 2 daughters, and I'm one of 3 sisters as well, so that also informs my work. So I think if you've seen it, and a lot of you won't have, it's about femininity, and it's about upbringing and how it affects us later. And it's not always dark. Some of it is very dark. So I started off with these baby formers, where you've got a little baby squeezed into a former which says, tighten a little bit every month because it's female. And you've got an expectation. And we're always trying to put on a face. But actually, that's also strength. That's how we fit into the world. So it's also strength. There are a lot of groups and pairs because we give each other strength as well. I'm looking at these. So I've got a lot of things in the textures that I use. So I'm layering up. So I'm making figures, but I often layer up so that the surface is cracked. And nearly everybody says, oh, and it's lovely clothes. So there's a lot of process in the clothes. And yes, I do make fabric clothes to fit every child out of children's clothes. They've got to be the right fabrics, and then there's a lot of treatment goes on after that. Next slide, please. 40% of people have been... Oh, no, that's different. So a lot of the things that I'm looking at the moment are about upbringing, as I say, and it's about common things in upbringing. So whatever background almost that you come from, I can say some things people remember. They're going to remember their very best toy. Some still have it. Their favourite. Yeah, you've got your best toy. I've still got my best toy and they're people. So there are certain things and there's certain memories that we all have, like, clothes or something that was incredibly embarrassing. We'll all think of something that was really embarrassing, especially when you're a teenager, and you can think about your family and your ties. So that's a lot of what I'm working on right now. But because I'm talking so much, I think I'll move on to the next slide so I can start saying. I use doll faces. So I've got lots of old dolls. Well, actually, often they go back to the charity shops, and I make little casts of their faces because it's all about childhood and it's about the perfection and it's about trying to be the doll. But that means it's difficult when you're a sculptor because people are drawn to faces. They always look at a face. That's how we read people, except in some circumstances. And it's made life hard for me because it means then every expression on the piece has got to be in the stance. So it's all about what the body's doing. And I'm not a great sculptor, so I'm sorry. But it's developing that figure. If I was a great sculptor, I'd be able to do wonderful portraits of you all, but I don't do that. It's about the figure, and it's about movement. Next slide, please. So using a stance, and even if you've got groups, can do quite different meanings in what are quite similar pieces. In those as well, you can see there's the disrupted surfaces and things. There's an awful lot of stuff going on, I'm afraid. I'm afraid because actually it's really hard work. And it makes it a bit difficult. Also, the thing about the masks is I find lots of people are coming past and they say, oh, it's really scary. They don't like it. They don't like a doll face. It's because you're used to reading someone's expression and you can't. And so it's like, oh, that is already off-putting. So I think I quite like that. I like to unsettle people just a little bit. I'll have the next slide, please, and I'll just start making something. The main thing I do is to make an armature. So basically, it's a framework underneath, and I use paper drinking straws because, as you can see, proportions change so much. One of the many, many things that I make life hard for myself with is that I've chosen children, and the proportions change as they go up. And because I started off doing engineering design, I cheat. So I'm just going to I use the drinking straws, and actually I draw these out on my work surface at home. So I've normally sketched something on my work surface to get the proportions right. And I also, people have come past, I sketched an idea, but that's not necessarily how it'll always end up, and you'll see why. So it's a bit like Blue Peter, this. It's like speed thing. You can hum if you like. So I'm going to make myself a little armature out of the straws because they're hollow, because they're paper, because it doesn't really matter that they stay in the kiln. And I can get the proportions right. I can go, okay, I want this sort of size. Obviously, they're going to shrink when they're fired. You have to forgive me because it's a bit like watching paint dry, isn't it? Watching somebody else making something. I thought I would do a pair because that's what I've been sketching. Well, I've been sitting on the stand at the moment and thinking about sisters. So I was going to do a pair of figures. I like pairs and groups, apart from anything, because doing stands is a pain. And they hold each other up. And that says a lot as well, doesn't it? We hold each other up. I have used bubble wrap. A lot of people use bubble wrap, don't they? Currently in padding things out in an armature, but I lately just use kitchen roll because it's not so noxious. My kiln is actually in my studio, and although I'm not there when it gets up to that temperature, so I should be doing this over here, shouldn't I? Sorry. Although I'm not there, it isn't nice to think about all those fumes of the bubble wrap. You just want something that, as the clay starts to dry and tighten, isn't going to crack the clay. I mean, it's really a pain if you think, oh, I've done that and it's beautiful, because I'm not going to hollow out. It's going to stay like this and go straight in the kiln. And you really don't want cracks and breaks all over the place. So it's actually quite rough. Normally I might take a little bit more time. I'm going to think about it. I'm going to have a cup of tea. I can talk to the dogs. One of them's here, actually. She's just arrived to keep me company. And I'm making a very, very basic stick person. It is like Blue Peter. And this is the nice bit. I mean, actually, there are a lot of, I'm sure with a lot of potters, there's a lot more materials goes into pottery than just clay, as we all know. So I'm doing this quite quickly because you don't really need to, I should have done this is one I made earlier, but I didn't know what I was going to do until this morning. So, oh, she could have a head. She could have a head. Give her a head. I can also, this way, I can change the stance. So as I say, everything is about stance. I've got to put everything in the stance. If I've got paper straws underneath, it gives it just enough strength to move the limbs around while it's wet without it falling apart. So it's actually really useful. So, Bill and Ben. And sticks. And the other great thing about drinking straws, if she hadn't got it stuck down up over the top, is they're hollow. Heads have to have more space to the front, and I hadn't done that. So you can reinforce them with sticks. Now the sticks I do tend to take out because they're not going to shrink. They will distort the piece. But you can stand things up. It's really handy. You can put them in their legs, you can move them around, because you want to try and keep the stance as much as you can. I don't put in straws for the arms because the arms are really quite thin on a figure this size. So I'm sorry, my hands are actually shaking. That was too much coffee, which is the story of my life. I don't put arms on yet. Normally I would make the arms whole and I'll add them on. But actually I tend to take them off again and put them on when it's leather hard. As with everything in ceramics, everything is about drying time, as we probably all know. Everything's about drying time and getting things at just the right level. Yes, I know. Doesn't want to go through there. Let's put it through that one. I will move the legs around because basically when you've got the rough figures in, but it's really good to try and sculpt a figure upright. It's very tempting to do something, especially if it's small down there, and when you turn it up the right way, it looks wrong. So I tend to do that and I can fiddle with it. And as I say, I've got this on the bench, I keep putting it up and down, and I will move it around. I am going to use that sketch, but as I say, I've got about 4 different stances of people as pairs holding on to each other. I was thinking of Gainsborough's daughters. Do we know Gainsborough's daughters? They're leaning against each other. But things can change. The trouble with drawing too much is you can get constricted by it. And you don't want to do that. You want to let the clay do its thing as well. So this is just a grogged stoneware, white grogged stoneware. It's lovely, this stuff. And it's literally just a case of starting to build up. One of the things I like to do is the sculpting is quite quick. Because if it's about movement and you want to get some sort of feeling of a figure in it, you've got to work quite quickly to get some immediacy in it. I am never going to be someone who's going to spend half a day, carefully scraping something out to make a figure. I get bored much too easily. But I would get the actual proportions right, a figure roughly right. You are welcome to say, what on earth are you doing? Or say anything, because the trouble is, as many of you I'm sure are makers, you just get involved in what you're doing and then you forget to say anything. Or I get involved in sketching and I think, oh look, there's people. How long have they been there? Always with a figure, as I say, I'm not working from life, but I do a lot of observation from life. So you're looking and you're thinking about how people stand and how people move. I have done, or as a student, done life sculpting, but so I'm not a portrait sculptor. It was more just to get the techniques right. But I find it's a bit disturbing because it makes you start looking at people and they're talking to you and you're going, oh, look how her nose goes. And you have to, no, of course I haven't got the ears right on something or other. And you don't know what they've said. The thing about doing children is basically, I think we all know that their heads are large in proportion to their bodies, but everything else changes too, so their midpoint does change. And sometimes you start it off and you think you've got it right with the drinking straws, but little tiny bits can change. And actually, I was just talking to Steve Booton about cups, and he says it's millimetres makes the difference between a good cup and a bad cup. And millimetres can make the difference between a believable body and an unbelievable body. And that is even more so with children. It's a bit tempting to go a little cartoony. And what I would normally do is I'd just get the basic bodies and then I'm going to play around with the stance and how they're going to interact. Because with a pair they have to interact. And as you can see, I haven't wedged it. I haven't done anything much to it. I wire it off and I put it on because you're moving it so much with your fingers, you're blending so much, it's fine. But also, like any pottery, but particularly sculpture, it's going to have to be really dry before it goes anywhere near the kiln. I just fire in electric at the moment, hoping to move to gas soon. And you do, with small figures, end up exaggerating a bit. That's fine. You want them maybe to be a little, especially children, they have tubby little tummies and bony little knees. And it's quite nice to play around with them. It's not, as I say, rocket science. It's just clay. And I will prop it up with some more sticks. This bit I've got it in is just packaging foam. It's really handy, packaging foam. Holds it just enough but also it's not going to stick. You can leave them to dry, take the whole bit of packaging foam off, do another one. So I'm going to start playing with the next one, because then I need them to stand against each other. If I do much more, they're going to just fall over. It's again white grogged stoneware, wired off. I do some that are just porcelain, but again, if you're a maker, you will know that that's pain. Porcelain looks fantastic, but for sculpting is really difficult. And it's not very spontaneous. It's quite plastic, as in it bounces back. It's got a little bit of resistance in it. And that can be difficult with sculpture. You want your marks to stay on. You want, if you're prodding them and you're moving it around, you really want to keep that in there. You're trying to tell a story with your fingers on a piece of clay, even if you're going to finish it up afterwards. And actually, there's also that thing that some of this gets covered up with clothes. The faces are going to get covered up with masks, but they've still got a face underneath, because I still feel like you've got to do a real figure. I'm going to untwist this all together in a minute. This isn't an actual sculpting clay. This is a throwing clay, this particular one. But I do like the texture, and I like that it's got a little bit of, I think it must be iron or something in it. I have to ask. Pot clay, so you do get your oxides and things have a bit more reaction going on with this than with a completely plain one. I thought you were walking forward to tell me something then. No. Stop it! No. I don't actually know the time, to be honest.
The time is 5:20.
Oh, it goes quick, doesn't it? That's the trouble. You go really quick because you think, oh my goodness, I've got 40 minutes to make a figure, which obviously would not take 40 minutes usually. They're going to fall over.
How long do your pieces normally take to make?
The sculpting bit, I do like to work quite quickly, so I would whiz through probably in an hour. But then you come back, and there's so many stages of doing things, but I think particularly with something like figures, it's very hard when you're just doing it to really see if you've got it right, if you've got what you want. So I would always put it away and not do anything until the next day. So I'd never just finish it and let it dry. So I will leave it wrapped for a day, and then I'll probably do another half an hour, or I'll scrap it if I don't like it. But it's just doing it on the straws is just a really nice way of doing it, because they get wet quite quickly. They are actually quite bendy now, so you can change them around. I can bend their legs and things. They have got the sticks inside to keep them standing up. Just take a stick out, move the legs around. So I normally make most of mine this stoneware. I then, while it's still leather hard, they have to have their dresses made, because I don't want the dresses to shrink back away from it too much. A lot of the cracking that I get on my surfaces is because I'm going from things that have got different drying times, but also porcelain, of course, shrinks back a lot more anyway. So it's about doing experiments to get those shrinking times right. Now I'm going to move her around. And I'm going to put them together. Because she's a little one. And even when it's this rough, this is what I mean about getting some sort of immediacy, and especially if it's a group. You're just going, you want to get the feel of it as quickly as you can. Even when the figures are not still quite right, because once you've got that, and especially once they've got a little bit firmer, you can fiddle around. You can make their heads a bit bigger. You can put more detail on. You can decide what on earth the clothes are going to be. So yes, I do make the clothes. As I say. So there's quite a few materials involved.
What do you make the clothes from?
Other children's clothes. So I get, usually, I do have other normal fabrics, but to keep the story, I tend to get children's clothes from charity shops. It's got to be certain fibres. They're quite, you have to be careful what you put in the kiln, but also you have to have something really nice and absorbent. So yes, I do make little clothes. I mix my own slips and layers. And so that's why they look just like the fabrics. But if I get it wrong, there's a lot of bits in it to make it strong enough and to hold the shape. And the fabric burns off, yeah. Just like the straws and the things. Right. So I guess I'm going to put some arms on just so to show you, but I would then be refining and refining. That's a bit tedious to watch. Just someone going, oh, I'll take a little bit off there. But I find the main thing, and also the other thing about proportions, because as I say, proportions are really hard in children, and especially if they're bigger or smaller, if they're chubby or not, then the proportions seem different. Their arms are shorter than us, so my arm's going to come down here, but you look at a child and their arms are not, because their midpoint is different. So, as I say, there are little tiny differences in things that suddenly make you go, oh, well, that's not, why doesn't it look right? And you think you've got it right because everyone goes, oh, there's, 8 heads in a figure, for instance, but there's not. Even on adults, there's very rarely exactly, I think. So if they're children, they're going to come down not so far. And you can just, with the kitchen roll, if it's something you sort of scraping away, I was just scraping away there, and you can find, oh, I've hit the straw, I've hit the kitchen roll, it doesn't matter, poke it in, and then fill in the little gap with some clay, which is really good. It's quite forgiving. Make sure her arm's the same. And as soon as you start assembling a group, they are going to hold each other up better, but only once they start drying. There does come a point with the straws and the kitchen roll where it's suddenly all got wet inside, and they can just go before you can dry them off. So I also have all around the studio handy little things that I suddenly have to grab to pick it up and put its head back on somewhere, because things can fall over really easily. So I'm quite lucky at the moment that my niece has 2 little girls, which got a little boy as well, so I can spend some time observing them. And so I would often not put the arms on completely, as in I'd get this right and then take the arms off while things dry a bit, because I actually also want the arms on the outsides of the clothes. So if you think about it, if you've got something with the arm right down, you need the clothes to go behind so that it looks real, even though the clothes do shrink back a certain amount. And it's all about stance. I think also thinking about shared memories of things, that is another thing we recognise in stance. So if you look at a figure, if you can't see its face, you're going to... Things strike a chord. You can go, well, that's what that felt like. If it's somebody being comforted, that's what it felt like when we were being really naughty. And if you can get the stance of something, it also does tie in with those memories. I think memories are what make us, and childhood is what makes us. Still missing an arm. They look very rough and ready. And I often think, well, if I was a proper sculptor, if I were Rodin, I'd be able to leave it like this, with all the finger marks, but that's not really what I'm trying to say. There are certain little bits that make a difference when you're sculpting that people recognise, like curves around the knees. Everyone always does people's legs going in at the knees, and if you look down, actually knees are fatter than the bit of leg around them. So there are certain little things one looks out for. Big one needs bigger hair. With the hair, that I do anyway, because I've usually made a shape and then I'm going to let it dry, and they haven't actually got their hair as such on at this stage, because I do a sort of self-made paper clay with some more kitchen roll fibre or loo roll fibre in it. Because then you can run a fork through it and then you get lovely hairy tendrils. And I do find that really picks up oxides and glazes as well, if you've got that texture. At the moment they've got really big feet. The feet are going to probably be the last things I do. For obvious reasons, they're helping to hold it up. So when they get a little bit drier, I start doing the feet. And again, even though I'm going to cover these sculptures with layers and layers of oxides and glazes, porcelain, mixed slip, so everything gets a bit dumbed down, I still, for some reason, do every single little toe, every single little finger at this stage, because for me, you need to know it's under there. Right. So for the faces, as I say, I try and think what the end thing, what am I trying to say? So I've got nearly 100 of these, of different dollies, and they have very different expressions, so I've made impressions of them all, and they're all numbered. and you want to try and capture what it is you're sort of saying. Are they actually going to be happy or are they not? But I do try to do the same face underneath that they have on the mask. But I can change the face that's underneath, especially if it's something where I'm thinking they're going to underneath feel doubtful, they're going to feel a bit scared, they're going to be comforting. Maybe a bit of that expression in the one underneath, but the one on top is very serene. So there's a fair amount of that going on. And you do also find, and actually often, and I haven't done it with this one because its head needed a bit of putting up. I'm going to do it on the other one. You cut the clay off the face to make the face with. The other thing about the faces is, I say, it's hollow. It's got its armature that's going to burn away, but you do need holes. So you're going to put your holes in for the eyes. And if you've seen my things, if they've got a mask, one of the eyes is looking out at the world and is happy wearing its mask or is being part of that, but the other one is looking at the one inside. So there's little bits of reason in everything, really. Sometimes I don't even know what the reasons are. So more often, you can stand like that, I'm going to actually cut their face off and make a face. She won't mind, it's fine. Because with the other one, actually, I've got layers of clay underneath, so I had to really prod in deeply. And then you can pop your face on, and it makes such a difference. As soon as you've got the face, you've got a person, even though the figure is itself still incredibly rough. Nearly everything, I use very few tools, as you can see. This plastic one, so I got in a toy shop, and I've never been able to find another one. And it's really, it's a bit stressful thinking I might have lost it sometimes, because it's just got the right two ends on it. And I'm just going to, again, I'm roughing in hairlines and things just because then it's trying to see how those proportions are going to go. Could actually just stay here all day. It's much nicer than sitting on the stand. Get the clay, make something. Say the thing about this way of working, and it's not perhaps a traditional way of doing a sculpture, is it does give you some freedom. And you just change it. It's up to how you feel the figure can go. So it can keep on changing, but it does also mean it's not always very stable until the next day. My studio is quite damp, so it can be 2 days that it stays really still too wet to improve. But it's very forgiving, and you can be very immediate, and you can say, yeah, I like that stance. Or you can just go, do you know what? That's not gonna be the one. And a lot of things don't get into the kiln. They just go into reclaim, aka the hole in the ground. There's certain bits of the body I really like the backs of the knees. You can spend ages going, oh, I like the backs of the knees. My poor nieces. What are you looking at the backs of my knees for? They're just very nice, dear. Lovely backs of your knees. So I rough it out, basically, and I'm trying to think how to tell a story. Often, I'm more likely to do 3 people because I'm the youngest of 3 sisters, and we support each other. And also, it's just really good for making a sculpture stand up if you've got 3 figures. And a lot of it, however much with ceramics you want to just do your own thing, you are brought back to having to make something actually work. Stand in the kiln. I have props all over everything, so I'm only ever going to be able to get 4 things in a kiln. It's quite a big kiln because there's props all over it to try and get them. On my stand, I've got some dancing girls that were meant to be doing like this, and now they're all going like this because I didn't prop it enough. That's fine. They're having a nice time, but you're always brought back with ceramics by the material, but also you're using it. You're just trying to go, what can it do? It's the most amazing material. And I think it's just about trying to let the ceramic material do its thing and do something with it. How am I doing for time? Is that it? Huh? There you go. Perfect. Any questions? Thank you.
So with the fabric, the dresses, you make the dresses and then sort of do it inside out so the fabric burns off the outside?
No, because the fabric, the slip I make is very fine-grained slip, and it's absorbed into the fabric so long as I've got the right fabric. So I have to do tests because some fabrics are great. Some fabrics look like they're going to be great. You can't just say it's got to be cotton because it's about the weave. It's about all sorts of things. What is it going to absorb? And it's about getting that mixture of slip right. So I mix my own slips, and it's got other things other than just the porcelain in it to try and give it a bit more strength. Because the thing is, it's so thin once the fibres have gone from the fabric that you need it still to have a bit of body. And also, you're going to reinforce it a bit more before it's fired. Yeah. So.
Do you have shrinkage issues? Because obviously you're using a bronze stoneware.
Yeah.
And you're using a
Porcelain.
With the fibres.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Porcelain. And sometimes if you adhere a different body,
They do.
They don't like it.
They don't like it at all.
Yeah.
And yes, and sometimes that can go too far, and often I get bits of the clothes haven't stuck enough, but I do put a layer between the stoneware and the clothes that helps to stick. But it doesn't always, because if you've got a little bit of air, for instance, in between, then basically the porcelain goes, no, I'm not staying here, doesn't it? So, but actually for me, I don't mind because it's all about the cracked surface. It's about disrupted surfaces trying to say something. So you might have a figure that looks lovely, but actually the story is in the fact that the surface is a bit disrupted. It's not, everything is not actually what it seems. So I don't mind it, and you do get crumbly little bits, don't you? I've got people over here, you get crumbly little bits that come off. And that's part of life for them. It does work better. I've started doing some figures. If it's just porcelain for a figure, and the porcelain clothes, that's fine. All shrinks the same. So, yeah. But it is a lot of trial and error, and also 10 degrees of difference in the kiln can make a big difference.
So why don't you use my next question?
Yeah.
Why don't you just make the body from porcelain with a porcelain edition?
No, sometimes I do that, but I want the skin to have this crackling. So if I do that, then I have to get the porcelain, the first one, really dried, so they can have their clothes straight away. But then they have to be really dry before I put the next layers on. And porcelain doesn't like it, I've found. If you then suddenly put something wet on top of it, they just don't, they don't do it. But then with the porcelain ones, I'm going to fire them more times, and I can do layers on the other firings. And I don't bisque. The bisque is as slow all the way up to stoneware because of the porcelain.
How many firings might you do then?
The dancing girls had 7, but that was because of their legs. Normally two, 3, but some will have more. Because if you don't like something, that's the thing about ceramics, that nearly always something else you can do, even if it's, oh, I'm going to break off all the legs and make it into something else. Yeah, which happens, yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much. I can't get them home.